I'm just going to go here. Sarah Ward, I missed it. Sarah Ward interview, take 1.
What inspired me to become an artist? I think for me, I've always been fascinated by stories. I think when I was about 3 or 4, I developed a complete obsession with performing stories. I've always been interested in performance. I've always sought out opportunities to perform. And I'm very, very passionate about telling stories, and so much so that I would convince the people around me that I was a reincarnation of Lucy from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and that was part of my story, or that I was training to be a knight and would spend my evenings outside hitting trees with a sword trying to, learn drills and things like that. I've always been very, very passionate about telling stories, and as I grew older, it moved from performing to writing to directing to creating and devising original theatre. How I started the MISFIT Project was actually a school project. So I went to a Steiner school, and in the particular Steiner school that I attended, they do a Year 12 project, which is you can do anything you want, but you've got 12 months to do it. So I decided I was going to write, produce and direct a show, having never done any of the above, for the first time while also undergoing Year 12. So I was insane. But I was really... So growing up, I've always been different. I have a physical disability, which impacts the way that I move, and as such, I've always felt like I didn't fit in, I wasn't a part of things, like I was separate. And I started to notice that others felt the same way, and that I wasn't alone in that feeling. So what I did was I took that feeling and that wanting people to understand that experience of being different, and finding that place to belong, and I wrote a play about that. And that's very much where the heart of MISFIT came from. It was a place for people who didn't feel like they had somewhere to belong. And while I wrote, produced and directed this show, it was a retelling of Snow White. It was all about these half human, half animal creatures that had never found anywhere that they could fit in the world, and the story was of Snow finding them and falling in love with one of them and showing them that they can be accepted, but also follow the traditional Snow White story within that as well. So I did that when I was 17, and I put it on as my Year 12 project, and out of that, the council in the Art Centre in Warburton here approached me, and they said, look, we really love what you've done. Do you want to keep going? And I went, with what? I've done my project. And they said, no, well, why don't you keep going? Just keep producing theatre. Like, it's really cool what you're doing. You're a group of young people who want to tell stories. We want to support that. So MISFIT kind of grew from there. It developed out of a project and a want to feel like we had somewhere to belong and where our stories were heard and valued, and giving us a platform to tell our stories for the wider community as well. I think for me, that's always been the core part of what we do. It's telling stories about issues that matter to young people and putting them out there for the whole community to engage with and to take away what they want to from it. So we've tackled a lot of very complex issues. We tend to have a bit of a reputation for quite dark content. We don't do a lot of light and fluffy stuff. We tend to tell stories that focus on mental health and substance abuse and domestic violence and sexual assault and the things that young people are really wanting people to be talking about, and to have their voice heard as part of the conversation in relation to those issues. So my fondest memory of MISFIT, which started as a theatre company and is now my full-time job, was probably, I think, the moment that I was able to stand up in front of a room full of 200 business people and have them want to engage with theatre. I have had so many absolutely incredible moments over the years, young people who I've seen come so far, people who were in really awful situations who've managed to turn their lives around, or who were suicidal and self-harming and in really dark spots, who've, through joining, found a place and knowing that we can provide that safe place and that opportunity to not only belong, but to be celebrated and to have your voice really matter. I think it's almost impossible to pick one moment for me, but I think if I had to pick one, it would be the first time I got to sit in the audience and watch one of the shows that I had written and directed. Because so often for the first couple of years of doing theatre, I was always backstage because I was controlling everything. I was trying to, stage manage as well as, make sure everyone's costumes were right and things. So I was always behind the scenes. I wasn't actually seeing the finished product. And I think that first time that I was able to sit there and watch the story that I had created unfold completely in front of my eyes was a really incredible moment. What is my favourite MISFIT production? I honestly couldn't answer that question. I think it could be any number of them. I love all of them that we've done for quite different reasons. I think every show that we've done has a whole new set of people or emotions attached to it, but I still think potentially it's that very first show. I think that feeling when we brought together this really, really ramshackle group of young people who were, half of them weren't even interested in theatre, they were just helping me out, but through doing it, we all came really together as a family who we were all passionate about sharing what we were talking about. We were all passionate about talking about being different and finding that place to belong. And I think that show, which was originally titled Mirror Mirror and is now known as While Your Lips Are Still Red, will always be the point that I come back to whenever I feel a little bit unsure of where we're going with next, I think. Yeah. What does the future hold for the MISFIT Project? I think that's a very hard question to answer, because if you'd told me 3 years ago that we would be where we are, where I would have a full-time job working in theatre, I would have 200 young people engaging in theatre or creative programs every week, I would have told you were crazy. But I guess the sky's the limit. We're coming up to 10 years this October, and that's going to be a really big milestone for us because 10 years of doing the same school project's a long time, and it's definitely come so far from there as well. I think for me, it's going to be finding a way to balance the running of so much against the creation of original material. But I think the future holds a lot of new voices. I think there's been a big shift in the issues that are really being highlighted by young people. There's a lot of young people are really kind of wanting to talk about environmental stuff at the moment. It's been a really, really big focus. So we're looking forward to working on doing some stuff to create some change in people's thinking around environment through theatre. But I think, it all comes down to the young people that are there, and I'm just excited to hear what they have to say. What is my favourite curse word? I think it's got to be fuck, because it is so misused all the time. People use it just in everyday sentences constantly these days, and particularly teenagers. And I just, the amount of times that I have told young people that it's lazy communication, but then I use it in the next sentence. So